This presentation is on Valeant Pharmaceuticals International Incorporated for MBA 691 from Nicole Fisher, John Gordon, Michael Olson, Emily Rum, and Zachary Tanner. Valeant Pharmaceuticals International is a multinational pharmaceutical and medical device company that creates, manufactures, and markets a range of products: brand name pharmaceuticals, generic pharmaceuticals, over-the-counter products, and medical devices. Valeant Pharmaceuticals is a diverse and decentralized pharmaceutical company that is committed to focusing on key stakeholders while delivering consistently high performance. The values provide the overall direction for the company and provide the tools necessary to rise to any challenge by leveraging collective hard work and effort along with an unwavering competitive spirit. These values help set goals on the organization's potential and what it will become. Valeant's focuses on business growth in attractive geographies and therapeutic classes while maintaining lower selling, general and administrative costs and decentralized operating structure. Valeant's other strategy is its business development. They continue to expand their portfolio offering and geographic footprint by purchasing value-added business development opportunities. Business growth is further enhanced through a more limited research and development model, allowing for the further development of programs to drive future growth.
This is John Gordon in Group 6 to talk about some of the factors in the general environment. One of the major factors in the most profitable markets of Valeant is the decreased income availability relative to drug prices. While many markets have yet to mature, within the U.S. especially, real income has been relatively flat over the last few decades. While during that time, drug prices have continued to increase. So this relative income availability will start to impact increasingly upon medical expenses, medical costs in general, and drug prices and drug expenses specifically. There's also increases in regulation. This is due to a couple of areas, both in terms of safety and also for antitrust concerns. As tragedies such as the Vioxx debacle occur, the call has gone out for increased regulation to ensure the safety of the drug supply and the safety of the products in general, whether the design of the drugs is solid. There have also been mergers and acquisitions which lead to concerns of monopolistic positions taken by drug companies. Increases in world population will largely increase the demand for medications, which in many cases are taking the place of what would otherwise be treated in inpatient settings. Also, there are technological advances which are leading to new products, new methods, and new markets. These products, methods, and markets do not hit globally. Primarily, they start with the developed areas and then eventually trickle down as they go on to generics into less mature, less advanced parts of the country and the world. The general factors in the environment may impact Valeant in a number of ways. In the short term, the higher prices would lead to better profits for Valeant. However, a continued increase in prices could be unsustainable and lead to changes within the market in general that may upset the business that they've developed for themselves. Similarly, acquisitions are reducing competition, which is playing a large part in driving up prices. The higher prices, however, may not necessarily be enticing new entry because of the barriers to entry that exist, such as the regulation, the knowledge necessary, and the infrastructure to develop new products. One of the concerns, however, around these acquisitions is that the acquisitions are reducing competition to such an extent that this is prompting investigation and regulatory action. Some of the cases are where effective monopolies are forming. In other cases where there simply isn't a real opportunity for another manufacturer to come into the market responsively enough for a response to be made if a company jacks up the price drastically on a particular drug. Valeant is positioned well for some of the factors that are occurring with the increase in population, as well as a shift from prescription to over-the-counter medications. Given Valeant's positioning within the over-the-counter market and the increased population, which would increase demand for those products, Valeant's positioned well to respond to that. However, their lack of R&D leaves it poorly positioned to benefit for the continual advances. For example, their up-and-coming area of genetics and combining genetics with pharmacology is not an area where Valeant has invested much at all.
The pharmaceutical industry is part of the overall healthcare sector. The main goal of this industry is to develop, produce, and market medications that prevent infections, maintain health, or cure disease. The pharmaceutical industry is primarily dominated by the US, Asia Pacific markets. Within these markets, the total world consumption and sales of pharmaceutical products displays strong growth and is expected to grow further with expanding populations in emerging markets. The U.S. pharmaceutical market is forecast to increase from an estimated value of $395.2 billion in 2014 to reach $548.4 billion by 2020, representing a compound annual growth rate of 5.6% according to research firm Global Data. This growth is driven by a number of factors: increasing healthcare expenditure, an aging population, the rise of chronic lifestyle diseases, universal access to compensation for pharmaceutical costs, and the 2010 Patent Protection and Affordable Care Act. More recently, many companies' high-profile drug patents have expired. This will likely begin to impact the global pharmaceutical industry, with generic manufacturers likely to benefit from capturing substantial portions of revenues with generic versions of these patentless drugs. The five biggest companies by market cap in the pharmaceutical industry are Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Novartis, Merck, and Bristol Myers Squibb Company. The combined revenue of these five companies accounts for 20% of the $1.1 trillion global industry revenue. Of these pharmaceutical industry competitors, Johnson & Johnson functions with the highest operating margin of 27.39%, earning about 27 cents before interest and taxes for every dollar in sales. This margin determines how well the company can pay on their debt and create value for shareholders by generating operating cash flow. According to Reuters, the industry average operating margin is 15%. And with that said, only 3 of those top 5 companies exceed the industry average. During 2015, Bristol Myers Squibb Company was the only one of these top 5 competitors to make positive revenue growth at 4.29% to reach $16.5 billion for that year, meaning that Bristol Myers Squibb was able to grow sales for its products faster than that of these much larger companies. Competitive forces in the pharmaceutical industry. The threat of new entrants is relatively low due to high costs associated with research and development costs, high capital requirements, existing brand name presence, patents, and high learning curve. Threat of substitutes is high when generic drugs exist as an alternative to the brand name drugs. When patents expire on brand name drugs, generic drug manufacturers are able to come into the market with many substitutes. Outside of generics, substitutes are usually limited, lower in quality, performance, and higher in cost, leading to a low threat. Bargaining power of buyers is low because of the low buyer price sensitivity due to limited choice in brand name products. With limited information available to the buyer, choice is also limited, making the buyer more dependent on the product, specifically brand name, available. Bargaining power of suppliers is low due to a large number of substitute inputs, creating intense competition between suppliers. Prices for these product inputs stay relatively low, making it easier for production companies to switch between suppliers. Suppliers critically rely on volume sales in order to profit. The degree of industry rivalry is high among the few companies in the industry. These companies use their drug patents to secure market space with their product line. Exit barriers are relatively low in this industry, with weaker firms more likely to leave the industry, increasing profits for the remaining firms. Revenue is growing rapidly, which is growing the total size of the industry, but when growth of the industry is low, the only way for companies to grow is to steal market share from other competitors. While initial investment costs in research and development to create new products are staggering, a company can recoup their investment by using patents. When a medicine is covered under a patent, it means that only the company that holds the patent is allowed to manufacture, market, and profit from it, thus creating the competitive advantage, and in this case, a monopoly, in the market, removing all bargaining power from buyers. This will be effective for over the life of the patent, but once the patent has expired, the drug can be manufactured and sold by other companies, referred to as a generic drug. With a generic drug on the market, the monopoly is removed, competition resumes, resulting in a significant drop in drug costs due to high bargaining power of the buyers choosing between many generic substitutes that now exist. While the original company may renew the patent by creating a new version of the drug, potentially capitalizing on the brand power that was created during the marketing of the original product, this would require new clinical trials and reapplication of the patents. Further, the new compound would still have to compete with the original generic substitutes available on the market. Driving forces in the pharmaceutical industry. Life expectancy and aging. Globally, the average human lifespan has increased greatly over the last few decades. However, additional infections and diseases also come along with this increased longevity. This has led the industry into increased investment in aging populations. The pharmaceutical industry's goal is to prevent disease or infection and maintain health to increase the quality of life for everyone. Chronic lifestyle diseases. Unhealthy daily habits have led to unhealthy eating, lack of exercise, less sleep, and a host of other problems, the result of which is rising obesity rates, poor digestion, breathing difficulties, and other physical problems. Health supplements and medication have been introduced to mitigate these sorts of issues, reducing illness and supplement daily nutritional needs. Emerging economies. The changing disease patterns in emerging markets will provide pharmaceutical companies with additional opportunities for their existing product groups. Although infectious diseases still dominate in many emerging markets, non-infectious diseases are expected to rise as well. The World Health Organization stated, contrary to widely held beliefs, developing countries are increasingly suffering from high levels of public health problems related to chronic diseases. In 5 out of the 6 regions of the World Health Organization, deaths caused by chronic diseases dominate the mortality statistics. Although human immunodeficiency and viruses, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, malaria, and tuberculosis, along with other infectious diseases, still predominate in sub-Saharan Africa and will do so for the foreseeable future. 79% of all deaths worldwide that are attributable to chronic diseases. These illnesses are characteristic of those associated with more highly developed regions, mirroring the Western regions. This development presents pharmaceutical companies with an opportunity to market their global products in an extended market, but also necessitates a change in the market strategies and operating models. Key success factors for firms in the pharmaceutical industry. First, products. Success for firms in the pharmaceutical industry depend on a continuous pipeline of products. The number of drugs in the development process indicates the proficiency of a company with research and development. Solely relying on one product within a company poses a huge financial risk. Only 5 in 5,000 drugs that enter the preclinical testing progress to human testing. One of these 5 drugs that are tested in people is approved. The chance for a new drug to actually make it to market is thus only 1 in 5,000. To recruit investors, companies must demonstrate the ability to generate revenue, have products close to the market introduction, have full research and regulatory pipeline, and have validation from partners on product effectiveness. The number of products and the quality of the production pipeline is essential to keep the company's product pipeline saturated and competitive with others in the pharmaceutical industry. Next is marketing. A marketing plan is essential to a company's success with their products. It should begin early in the product development lifecycle, where a company should ask, how will the product be positioned in the market? Targeting the end user of the product, doctors, patents, or even the insurance companies and public health agencies to spark and develop interest in what you will be bringing to the market. Another question to ask is, how will the product be distributed and sold, domestically and in foreign markets? The likely strategy of small firms is to form arrangements with larger pharmaceutical companies and other partners to create inroads to get their products as close to those they're marketing to as possible. But as a company grows, they should continuously reevaluate their sales channels.
Valeant Pharmaceuticals is a multinational pharmaceutical company based in Quebec, Canada. Valeant manufactures mostly generic pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter products. Valeant specializes in dermatology, eye health, aesthetics, consumer products, gastrointestinal, oral health, neurology, and other therapeutic areas. Currently, the company markets its drugs in over 100 different countries, subdivided into developed and emerging markets. Per the company's SEC annual 10-K filing, the main short-term strategy is to focus on business on core geographic areas and therapeutic classes that offer attractive growth opportunities while maintaining a lower selling, general administrative cost, and decentralized operating structure. The growth of the business is further augmented through a lower risk, output-focused research and development model. The long-term strategy has also included deploying cash via business development, debt repayment repurchases, and share buybacks. The company's expansion strategy has been one of acquisitions and takeovers in order to gain additional market share and stifle competition. Recently, in February 2016, Valeant announced it was under investigation by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Most of the investigation was a result of Valeant's price raising on name-brand products. In 2015, Valeant raised prices on name-brand products by approximately 65%, which was approximately 5 times more than the company's closest competitors. The company operates divided into 2 main segments, developed markets and emerging markets, and based on the market, the company modifies their offerings of products based on the consumer base. Developed markets include sales in the U.S. of pharmaceutical products, over-the-counter products, and medical device products, as well as an alliance and contract service revenues in areas of dermatology and other various brands. Also included are developed markets are Western Europe, Canada, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Conversely, emerging markets constitute Central and Eastern Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. In 2015, developed markets represented $8.5 billion, or 82% of total revenue, while emerging markets comprised the remaining $1.9 billion, or 18%. The company's revenue by product category was noted as pharmaceuticals representing $6.1 billion, devices representing $1.5 billion, and over-the-counter products representing $1.6 billion. Coming in last place was generic products representing $1.1 billion. Geographically, the United States is the clear leader in purchases, representing $7.1 billion of the company's $10.4 billion in sales. Canada is the next closest country with $333.6 million in total revenue contribution. Valeant Pharmaceuticals' tangible assets were $8.1 billion, with intangible assets of $40.9 billion, creating a total asset position of $49 billion as of the most recent quarter ended March 31, 2016. The company's tangible resources are comprised primarily of cash and cash equivalents, trade receivables, and property and equipment. The 3 largest U.S. wholesaler customers accounted for approximately 40% of net trade receivables. The company appears to have a well-diversified receivables account, which reduces the risk if one of the wholesaler entities were to experience financial stress and not be able to satisfy payment obligations. A majority of the company's assets, however, are tied in drug patents and goodwill associated with those products. Per the company's SEC filing, goodwill and intangible assets represent a significant portion of total assets. Events giving rise to impairment are difficult to predict, including the uncertainties associated with the launch of new products, are an inherent risk in the pharmaceutical and medical device industries. As a result of the significance of goodwill and intangible assets, the company's financial condition and results of operations for future periods could be negatively impacted. Such an impairment of goodwill or intangible assets occur, which could cause market value or common shares to decline. The loss of the patent or a public trust can severely impact the company's ability to generate net income and ultimately impact the company's asset base and corresponding equity. Valeant Pharmaceuticals has an adequate liquidity position based on its net working capital position of $1.6 billion and cash equivalents of $1.3 billion, which was 2.7% of the company's total assets of $49 billion. Valeant Pharmaceuticals appears to be highly leveraged with a total liability to net worth ratio of 7.49 to 1 and total equity of $5.8 billion. Based on the March 31, 2016 financials, Valeant Pharmaceuticals' net income decreased $471.4 million, or 478.6%, to a net loss of negative $372.9 million for the 3 months ending March 31, 2016, compared to a $98.5 million net income for the 3-month period ended March 31, 2015. The company's EBITDA of $828 million was sufficient to cover fixed charges of $150.3 million by a strong margin of 5.51, resulting in a cash flow surplus of approximately $677.9 million. Cash flow provided by operating activities increased to $558.1 million as opposed to $491.1 million for the 3-month period ending March 31, 2015. Below is a summary of the key financial highlights and ratios for the period ending 3/31/2016 and fiscal 2015 ending 12/31/2015. Assets remained relatively stable while the net worth or equity position fell just slightly. Net income had a large loss for the first period of 2016 as opposed to fiscal 2015. In addition, the EBITDA percentage has fallen from fiscal 2015 to current period 2016. The company's current ratio has remained relatively stable, as well as total liabilities to net worth. When evaluating the company as compared to others within the peer group, in both the sector category and specific NAICS code of 325412, the company's gross margin of 74.7% was higher than the industry's average of 69%. When evaluating EBITDA, Valeant Pharmaceuticals' 38.6% average is higher compared to a peer average of negative 82.9%. However, the company's balance sheet was dismal as evidenced by its weaker current ratio of 1.36 and poor total liabilities to equity ratio of 7.49 to 1 when evaluating against peer groups with very healthy liquidity and low leverage. The company's Moody's rating is currently B2 with a negative outlook, and Standard & Poor's rating is B with a stable outlook. Valeant's competitive advantage was ironically not in its ability to produce and manufacture quality pharmaceuticals, but in its ability to identify and acquire companies that were undervalued in the market and then dramatically inflate the price of the drugs once acquired. Per an article in the New Yorker, Valeant's acquisition-based roll-up strategy was probably doomed to fail. It depended on the idea that Valeant alone was smart enough to recognize and exploit the drug industry's low-hanging fruit. To succeed, Valeant needed not only to be very good at identifying undervalued assets and maximizing their value, it needed everyone else to be slow-witted to adapt to the tactics. In effect, Valeant's promise to investors was that $100 bills were lying all over the sidewalk, and it was the only one smart enough to spot them and pick them up. Valeant's merger and acquisition strategy allowed the company to keep expenses very low by limiting investments in R&D and the personnel to support to foster drug development. Valeant would seek out undervalued companies to purchase, dramatically reduce expenses, and then increase the drug pricing to reap steep profits. However, as noted above, this approach was soon focused on short-term profit maximization instead of long-term growth. Soon, many started to question the company's business and practices and tactics. The once strong competitive advantage soon became a liability and recently caused the dramatic decline in stock price as well as SEC investigation.
The problems and issues facing Valeant include their pricing strategy. The strategy is aggressive and needed to be to continue their method of mergers and acquisitions. But it sparked negative attention from the government and including investigations by the Securities and Exchange Commission, Department of Justice, the U.S. attorneys in Massachusetts and Southern New York, as well as the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Valeant cannot argue that they are staying on par with their peers who are also raising prices, since they're raising prices by an average of 66% on all name brand products, which is 5 times higher than their peers in the pharmaceutical industry. Goodwill is an asset of any company. Valeant's goodwill is quickly diminishing because of their pricing strategy. Here's an example of the human impact of Valeant's strategy. This retiree that you see on your screen is from Michigan. He takes a Valeant medication called Cuplamine. In May of 2015, his out-of-pocket expense after Medicare was $366. After Valeant raised the price, it's now going to cost him $1,800 a month, and the cost covered by Medicare would be approximately $35,000. You see him pictured with his wife, who now is taking on a part-time job just to help pay for his medication. Valeant's strategy has long been to focus on mergers and acquisitions rather than research and development. The logic for this is that research and development is costly and risky. In the pharmaceutical industry in the United States, only 1 in 5,000 drugs makes it to market. Their strategy has been to buy proven products that have already been developed but are currently undervalued. They also took financial steps to reduce their tax burden by merging with a company and officially headquartering in Canada. They've also alienated some of their investors by using opaque accounting methods, which make it hard to decipher what's really happening within the company, as well as their high leverage position. Their aggressive merger and acquisition strategy is very short-sighted. No research and development means that there's no new products in the pipeline to offset the debt.
There are several problems that are distinct yet related that Valeant is facing at this time. First of all, their pricing model is raising ethical issues. They have set up a situation where their right to price the product that they manufacture is at odds with the individual's right to a fair price. The market argument for pricing in this case is somewhat compromised by the monopolistic position that Valeant has taken. It's also further compromised by the amount of lobbying that the pharmaceutical industry has engaged in order to affect policy in their behalf. The second problem is that their mergers and acquisition strategy is likely not sustainable. Within the pharmaceutical industry, historically a large portion of the profits has been rolled back into research and development in order to maintain upcoming products within the pipeline. Rather than focus on research and development, Valeant has focused on acquiring and managing new properties in order to enhance the profits out of those properties. Concern with this is that it results in fewer innovative products, a reduction in competition, and a market that is reduced and effectively cannibalized. Finally, Valeant's pricing methods have threatened both shareholder and public support. The extreme increases in prices that they effected once they purchased certain drugs have resulted in increased scrutiny both on regulatory and even congressional levels. This has limited their ability to raise prices sufficiently to pay off the debt that they acquired in their buying spree. Slow down their cash flow threatens to undermine the company as a whole, causing the share price to tumble drastically. Meanwhile, massive increases in life-saving drugs have eroded public support. Recent actions of certain pharmaceutical companies to acquire life-saving drugs and then drastically increase the price have caused public scrutiny and congressional scrutiny to increase. This limits the flexibility and the attention that Valeant has to tackle the problems that will enable it to turn its poor situation around.
In formulating strategic alternatives for Valeant, Valeant's strategic alternative 1 is stabilizing the balance sheet by reducing the debt load and financing future acquisitions through equity. In order to reduce the leverage currently on the balance sheet, the company needs to realign its core business model and focus on drugs and medical sectors that provide the most gross margin return to the bottom line. Most recently, Valeant announced a large asset sale to attempt to recoup as much as $1 billion from assets that are either not generating the expected return or in need of additional R&D, which Valeant is not positioned to execute. For the company's most recent earnings call, core assets include the Bausch & Lomb franchise, the Salix franchise, the Derm franchise, and the consumer franchise. There are some areas the company referred to as non-core and are places where the company will look to for potential asset sales. Ironically, while the company paid a steep price for several of the assets in consideration for sale, other pharmaceutical companies will likely not be willing to offer fair prices, knowing the distressed financial state of Valeant. By paying down debt through the sale of selected assets, the company will incur a decrease in revenue, but proportionally, the larger decline in expenses should provide an overall net benefit to the company. Ultimately, by regaining control of the company's financial stability through effective balance sheet management, the company can position itself for long-term growth through organic growth of current product lines and with support of both shareholders and the public. Increased performance and health will likely attract new investors and additional capital to provide the company with the ability to reinvest in itself. On a go-forward basis, the company should evaluate using equity financing as opposed to debt financing to maintain acquisitions. Equity financing through the use of preferred equity would allow the holder of the preferred equity to receive a preferential return paid prior to common equity interests. This way, Valeant would have more control over the payments made as opposed to interest payments in debt, allowing for a more flexible operating structure. In evaluating a second strategic alternative for Valeant, the second option would be to modify business methods by increasing spending on R&D to better align with competitors, or forming joint ventures to slowly modify current operations. When evaluating Valeant's current business model, as noted earlier, the company is focused on making acquisitions of drug companies versus investing in research and design of new products. While the actual cash invested in R&D is noticeably lower when compared to competitors, additionally, when evaluating products going to trial, both Pfizer and Merck had over 3,000 drugs going to trial, while Valeant trailed far behind with only 85. Given this stark difference, an argument could be made that Valeant is so far behind peers that even doubling current R&D efforts would only provide a marginal improvement in the company's ability to produce and develop new drugs. While a long-term focus on becoming more committed to R&D would serve Valeant well in the future by allowing a focus on new drugs and organic growth, with the current stressed financial position and personnel in place, this strategy will be very difficult and costly to implement. As a bridge between the current M&A strategy and directing all focus to R&D, Valeant could entertain the idea of joint ventures to leverage their distribution network and manufacturing processes with a company or lab more focused on drug development. Valeant could then leverage their strong operations with those of a more science-based organization to provide for greater production and delivery to the public. Since joint ventures are often able to be formed without obtaining debt financing or incurring substantial costs, consumers would still be able to purchase the drugs at reasonable prices, while Valeant could reap the benefits of the R&D expense of the other company without having to invest substantial cash. As the company entered more joint ventures and became more familiar with the R&D side of the business, they could slowly pivot their business model to increase R&D spending with the auxiliary earnings from the partnership. Additionally, increased earnings from the partnership would allow the company to increase cash flow for possible dividend repayments for shareholder benefit. Lastly, the joint venture route would also allow the company to improve public image by partnering with smaller labs or firms struggling to maintain their operations or distribute their product. In evaluating both strategic alternative 1 and 2 for Valeant, each comes at a very different cost. With strategic alternative 1, reducing debt to stabilize the balance sheet and use equity for future acquisitions would not incur any direct costs. Indirect costs incurred through the sale of assets would be legal organization as well as the possible lost revenue from the assets that are sold off. In a best case scenario, the sale of the assets would be to sell those that are currently costing the company more to operate than they are returning. By divesting these assets, the company could retain an overall cash flow increase. The sale would also allow for organic growth of current core segments to receive much more funding and attention. Conversely, with strategic alternative 2, additional funding for R&D and or the creating of joint ventures would cause the company to incur additional direct costs to organize and infuse capital into these projects. Given the R&D investment would provide future benefit, the cost could be capitalized, creating a smoother bottom line impact versus direct expensing, which allows for a more unstable and unpredictable impact. The use of joint ventures would also allow for indirect increase in R&D through the partnership with a much smaller capital outlay for Valeant. In fiscal 2015, the company generated $2.2 billion in cash from operations. So cost of additional R&D or joint venture formation should be limited to cash the company can generate internally and not incur any additional debt financing. When evaluating the benefits of each new alternative for Valeant, both Strategic Alternative 1 and Strategic Alternative 2 carry different levels of risk. In Strategic Alternative 1, the benefit of an improved balance sheet will provide the company with greater flexibility of operations, dividend payments, and the ability to secure debt at a lower rate. With a reduced debt load, the company will be able to focus less on making interest and principal payments and more on investing back into the company as well as to the shareholders through cash dividends. From an ethical and legal standpoint, reducing the balance sheet debt carries no additional risk. Additionally, the public may not show any interest in this change in capital structure. However, Wall Street investors and analysts will take note and begin repurchasing shares in the company as the debt levels are reduced and free cash flow is much more prevalent. In Strategic Alternative 2, the benefits of increasing R&D spending provide little short-term benefits since most drugs take years to develop and produce. Additionally, from an ethical and legal standpoint, the company would be exposed to a much greater risk as drug recalls and inadvertent side effects are an unavoidable nature of the industry. So by opening up and investing in new R&D, the company could be opening itself up to greater lawsuits and legal actions if the drugs produced do have side effects that are unintended. While joint ventures would provide a lesser degree of financial impact, the financial increase would also be felt sooner if the partnering firm was already in the development or testing process. Additionally, this option would also provide another company to share legal and ethical risk present with pure R&D option.